Welcome back to our stories of hope and faith. And on this program, you've seen a variety of stories of persons whose lives have been impacted and who've been positively impacted by their faith. And today we have a very special guest, a very familiar face to so many in this country. Those of you who watch How Was That Sunrise? How could I forget that? And we have none other than Anastarcia, Palacious, better known as Star. So, Star, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Pastor Dave. It is a blessing to be here, to be with you, to share on just how good our God is and the ways in which we can see our faith just transform our lives. So I'm blessed to be with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. And talking about your story, you grew up in Freeport.
I did. I was born here in Nassau at the Princess Margaret, but my parents had moved to Grand Bahama several years before my birth. And so I've had the distinct privilege of loving and spending summers and Christmases with my time with my family in Chippenham, and that crew coming out of Gambia and into Chippenham. And then to just spend most of my days growing up in Freeport, which was just an absolutely beautiful city at that time and an amazing place to grow up.
So tell us about what was your experience growing up? What was family life like? What um, did you have a relationship with God early on in your life? When did it develop? How did it impact you?
Yeah, so family life, I think I've been blessed most richly with wonderful parents. And as I get older and I'm exposed to so many more circumstances, I never take that for granted to have people who really love you, Pastor Dave, and want the best for you. And so we were blessed. We didn't grow up incredibly wealthy, I guess. I remember when my first experiences and memories were at our homestead on Tamarind Street, which is closer to the inner city of Freeport. And we lived in a duplex there. We had some wonderful neighbors who were the Roberts. And our street was just filled with children. And so we would run up the road and grab salty. There was somebody selling cups next door, a hairdresser next door. So it was that type of community. And just a few feet away from that was our primary school, Mary Star of the Sea. And my sister and I had some good times there in that apartment with our parents. And it didn't necessarily have the most of things, as I mentioned before, but we had love. And so our mom would lovingly give us chicken wings for lunch. That was cold, and we had to eat that. Or there were occasions when like they could afford to buy us one pizza, and my sister would get the order in her class, bring me the other half to my class when she was done eating. And so, it was a community raising effort, I think. Over time, we were able to move into our own home. And that experience was beautiful because I watched my dad and my uncle, one of my uncles, Kentuck, they built that with friends coming from Nassau out of the labors of their own
They
hands.
physically
They
built that.
physically built
Wow.
that. And so, growing up in that space, my little brother then joined my sister and I much later. I'm 8 years older than him. She's 12 years older than him, and brought a new life to the house. And there were some good times, Pastor Dave. There were hard times as well. My father lost his job at one point for a significant period of time, and I think that significantly impacted both the relationship with my mom, and then as a man, I guess that you would face challenges in that
Right,
circumstance.
right.
But gratefully, in those moments, those were the times I remember, like my aunts coming in to pay our fees to go to school, right? And so never were they not sacrificing to give us the best in education or to try to just give us a foot up as much as possible. I think the hardest times during those years is when we would have a car working, which was quite often, and we would have to go and stand on the corner and wait for a friend maybe going to school in that direction or someone to give us a ride. And I remember me not really caring about it, but just the pressures I think that I would witness my parents being under. And so I look back at those years and I just feel so blessed every time I get into my own car and I'm able to drive, right? Because I know what it's like to not to have to wait to see if somebody would pick you up or give you a ride. And I think about then and now, and I just would hope that my parents, my father is passed on, but my mom in particular would recognize that her sacrifices blessed us so much, right? And that we get to be in a different position because they just gave. And so, yeah, and as all of this is going on, we are being raised by people who teach us about God. And we go to Sunday school. We went to the Pro Cathedral of Christ the King, and we'd go to Sunday school on Sundays. We'd go to vacation Bible schools in the summers. And at night, to get us to sleep, my mom would sing to us hymns like Amazing Grace and I Surrender All. And, so we grew up with this idea that God was important, prayer was important, that we had to stay focused on knowing who God was. And so all along the way, we've just had the opportunity to know Jesus and to know God. And as we got older, we got the opportunity to have individual experiences with Him. that I know for me in particular has allowed me to just continue to walk in His grace and favor.
Now, you mentioned that you mentioned to me earlier that when you were about 13, you had an encounter experience.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so at 13, the Pro Cathedral of Christ the King, and it might have been 13 or 14, we had something called Discovery, right? And there's a Discovery that they do for adults, but there's one that they call Youth Discovery. And it's a weekend where they lock you in, and you come in on a Friday, you leave on a Sunday, and you sleep even in the church. And this entire time, you're just going through spiritual experiences. People come and tell stories. There's videos. There was great food this particular year. The food was really good. I have to just throw that in there. And we just got to have the opportunity to engage as young people, have fun as young people, but really if we allowed it for the Spirit to take hold. And so in that weekend, in that moment, I got introduced to what I call the Holy Spirit experience, right? And the idea that I may know of God, but now I get to be in relationship with God. And it's not about submitting a list of prayers that are requests, right? Because God is not a genie, but about understanding that while there's something greater that lies within me, there's something that allows me to communicate with God. This is the thing that uses me to do abundantly above more than I could ask, think, conceive, or imagine, right? And so I don't really know how to describe the Spirit of God. If you felt it, then you know. And it's something that I remember crying a lot. I still cry all the time. I'll probably cry in this interview. And I just remember a feeling of peace, right? Which is what God says the Spirit is. And this idea that I just wanted to commit my life and everything I did from that point on in service of God. And I'm sure I got it wrong lots of times. I'm sure I'm still getting it wrong. But there's this idea of just joy that it doesn't matter how wrong I get it, Pastor Dave, because my sins are forgiven. And that's a blessing.
Well, the thing about it, I always tell people when they ask me about my experience, I know I came from a really, really rough situation and did a lot of terrible things. But the thing about it is, no matter who you are, you're going to have challenges in life.
Yeah.
And no matter who you are, you're going to make mistakes. And the minute we start believing that, okay, once I make a commitment to God, everything is going to go right, that's a fallacy.
Yeah.
So tell us how that experience shaped your life going forward. And, you've done some incredible things, been all over the world. You're a TV personality. People see you all the time. Just tell us how that experience as a teenager shaped and influenced your future.
Yeah, so that happened when I was about 13 or 14. And the year after that, my church gave me the opportunity to go to a regional conference of young people. And it was just amazing, Pastor Dave. My eyes were open for the first time to the world, right? And there were different people in this world, and they have different experiences with God. And we grew up in the Anglican faith, which of course is a bit more traditional and a little different than the non-denominational or Baptist faiths. And so this was my first time experiencing my religious discourse in this wide group of people coming from Trinidad and Jamaica and Antigua, and they worship different. They're playing different music, but it's still our hymns, it's still our collects, it's still the things that we say. And it just opened my eyes to how we can, even within the bounds of whichever denomination we choose to worship in, we can still be so free to worship God in new ways. And so that opened my mind, not just to that, but how much I loved learning about people and interacting with people. And I knew I wanted to do something that would allow me to reach people in the world. I wasn't sure what that looked like yet, but it had to be something international because the experience was so phenomenal. And out of that, you move into, continuing in your teenage years. So this is the first time you're having boyfriends. This is the first time you are, kind of discovering who you are. And so you love God, but it's also trying to figure out who am I and how do I fit into this world around me, where other young people are not as committed as I seem to be. At the time, I dated a young Christian rapper, and that was fun.
Who was that?
That was TJ Cross. At the time,
yeah, okay,
and
right.
that was good because it just allowed me again to just experience different aspects of what worshiping God looks like. That's one of the first times I heard you speak. You came to Calvary Temple as the roughneck pastor. I think they used to call it Youth Alive, or anyway, whatever weekend it was a big Christian weekend.
I remember that.
At Calvary Temple. And so, in that space, I was growing in my gifting. So God had blessed me since childhood with the gift of gab. And I'm grateful for, again, good parents, good teachers who saw that gift and nurtured it. And so at that time, I was doing a lot of talks with young people about being a Christian, about encouraging them to focus on God. some things that I said back then I might not say now because again the relationship evolves, but I was really passionate about making sure that people know this is an avenue and an opportunity for you to grow. And I left high school as head girl, and I had a scholarship to come here to the University of the Bahamas, COB at the time, and God made a way. After my first semester, my scholarship was done, but somehow it got renewed, and I had the opportunity to stay in school, Pastor Dave. And after that was done, I was sitting right here on this BFM stage, and I remember Pastor Dave talking to this lady. Now, Pastor Dave, I got to preface this story by saying I didn't really want to speak with this woman, right? And it was no fault of her own. It's just that I had grown up not necessarily interacting with people from different races. I'm guessing there might have been some feelings of insecurity there for me or for whatever reason, but I was really nervous and had some anxiety that they would put me next to this woman.
Right.
But by the grace of God, raised by a good mother who taught me just always have manners, say good morning, say good afternoon, I engaged this lady in conversation, and at the end of it, she said, what would you like to do next? And I said, I'd love to continue my university education, but my parents don't have the funding for that. And she said, that's okay. I'm going to find a way to get you to college.
Wow.
Just like that, right? That's God, Pastor Dave.
Yeah, it is.
And for the next 2.5 years, I went to the University of Miami, full ride. Anybody knows about the U? It's pretty pricey.
University of Miami. Yeah, the Hurricanes.
The Hurricanes. A pretty pricey school, but it was all covered because God covered me. My tuition, my books, where I lived. I got the opportunity to go to Spain and live for a few months learning the language and just a full experience because God said it was so.
So who was this lady?
Oh, I want to shout her out. Her name was Judy Whitehead. People may know her. I think she's the managing partner at one of our top law firms in the country. And she had, at that time, was connected with a foundation that was looking to offer a scholarship in that moment, right?
That's amazing.
And they've not offered the scholarship before or after, but it was a project that they wanted to take on at that particular time.
And so you were in the right place at the right time. People would say, well, that's coincidence.
No,
but it
that's
almost
God.
seems like a plan.
That's God. Because, Pastor Dave, God hears the desires of our heart. And what I would say, I continue to grow. So this would have been over 10 years ago when this incident took place. And I'm not in the same place spiritually as I was back then. My heart had been crying out to God for different reasons at the time. I'd had my first breakup with my friend TJ that I mentioned, and I was devastated and heartbroken and not even really knowing how to love me, right? And at that time, I was dating another young man, and it was not a very good situation. It was quite toxic, and left me feeling depleted and not confident, with low self-esteem, and really navigating some hardship. So my focus even necessarily wasn't on education. And yet and still, God knew that I wanted so much more, and He had so much more in line, right? Because it all works according to the purpose to which He's called us. So at the right time, in the right moment, He put me in the right place for the right season, and the doors were opened for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous, tremendous story.
Yeah.
So now, take us from going to University of Miami, and then you come back home, and then at some point in time, you get into a relationship with your current husband. Tell us a little bit about that.
So my current husband, who I call my angel from the song Earth Angel. I wouldn't sing it for you guys because I'm no singer, right? But he and I actually met before I went off to the University of Miami and started dating just before that time. Again, it was one of those God-ordained moments where we'd met at Junkanoo through a mutual friend. We were pulling for the One Family Warriors. Junkanoo's want to come back, so I just want to put it out there. And we were Warrior fans in my house, and we were the only two Warrior fans, right? Everybody else, as you know, Pastor Dave, you're all Valley people. So they were pulling for the Valley, and he and I were the only One Family fans. And so we laughed about that. We became friends on Facebook, and then we didn't really speak for a couple months. As that is happening, I was also the youth ambassador for the Bahamas at the time. So I was doing a lot of international travel for youth rights and speaking about youth policy. And I happened to be in Sri Lanka, and I wrote a comment on it because I wanted young people to give me some feedback about some of the things we were presenting in Sri Lanka. And he sent me a note to say, oh, I see you in Sri Lanka. What are you doing there? And we started a conversation. He had just finished his engineering degree up in Canada and was about to come home for the summer. And so we just started to chat about those things. At the same time, I'm going through this very damaging relationship. And it's just, I want to insert this here, Pastor Dave, because I think people can look very well put together on the outside, and you have so much of the lights and the sparkle and the things that people admire, but they don't know what's happening on the inside, right? So I'm being very broken by this relationship. Even as I'm on stage and even as I'm traveling, I am dealing with a lot of the hurt and damage of this negative relationship that I'm in. And my husband at that point was just a friend. And so I remember just sharing some things with him and him really helping me to see that, could deserve a little bit more than that, and that I should be doing a little bit better. And he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, Jesus saves, not you. And so you think that you're saving this person that you're in this relationship with, but that's not your job. That's God's job.
Right,
And instead, you're damaging yourself in the process. And so we went from just being very good friends to eventually, because again of the grace of God, to getting into a relationship at, I think, 19 at the time. I was that young, and he was maybe 21. And we just have journeyed together since then. And God has been with us through the midst of it all. He's raised by good parents as well, both priests. And so he has a grounding of faith, and that has been the grounding of our relationship from the very beginning. We prayed before we decided we'd be boyfriend and girlfriend, and God has blessed us, right? Tremendously. Tremendously. So that was happening, and that was exciting. And then my dad died, Pastor Dave, 1 month after I graduated from the University of Miami.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was, I think, still the hardest thing that I've ever had to deal with, because it was sudden. It wasn't one of those deaths where you can plan for it or, pray about it. It was literally, I called my mom crying, as many young people do when they first come out of school and they're not making any money. And I was like, Mommy, how am I going to make it? And she's like, okay, baby, I want you to calm down. We're going to figure it out together. But I can't talk right now because your daddy just called me. He's at the hospital. And Pastor Dave, this threw me off because my dad is not a go to the hospital type of guy, right?
Right.
And so I immediately stopped crying because the conversation I'd called to cry about was money. And now this is the matter of life and death. And it puts everything in perspective.
Wow.
And from that point on, Pastor Dave, I've never cried about finances. If I have it, I've learned the story of contentment, right? Rather than little or much. Because if you put life in the balance of, I'm worried about this versus what really matters, it no longer matters. But unfortunately, even though my dad had gone to the doctor because he wasn't feeling well, they were unable to revive him. And this, of course, is all happening in Grand Bahama. My sister and I are here in Nassau. And so we got on a plane immediately after that conversation with my mom. But by the time as we got there, he was gone.
Wow.
And it was a lot. And and I think the biggest thing that has caused me to question God ever, how could you love me and take away the person that I love? And I remember my mother-in-law, again, she's a priest, and she called and she said, well, do you want to pray? And I said, no, I don't. I said, you pray for me. But, if God couldn't have my prayer when I was asking him to save my daddy, then he don't need to have my prayer right now.
Right.
But Pastor Dave, even after that initial moment of shock, I had to make a determination. Will I continue on the path with a God who has always been good, or will I allow a bad situation to take me away from the goodness of God? And the Bible says, draw nigh to God and he will draw nigh to you. And I had to make the decision that I was so broken and so hurt. But the Spirit of God is peace. The Spirit of God is comfort. And so I had to say, God, I have to trust in you to comfort me. I have to trust in you to walk me through this valley of the shadow of death. Because it's either I go hayward and wayward and crazy, or I abide in your loving presence, recognizing that 1, all things work together for the good. 2, he was your child before he was my dad. And 3, I have to believe in the glad reunion day. And that was my decision.
Wow, that's tremendous. And by the way, your dad was a friend of mine. I actually grew up with his younger brother. His younger brother was like my mentor on the streets.
Love you still, Uncle.
But that's a tremendous story. What's incredible for me is that people would look at you on the television screen, and they would see you doing these different events and speaking, and they probably look at you and say, boy, she had an easy life. She didn't have to struggle. She didn't have these issues that we have to deal with. But it's just amazing that no matter where you come from, that there's a way that your faith helps you through even the most challenging circumstances and produces what people see at the end of the day. But they don't see the process.
They don't. And I know for me, one of the things I prayed about, because my father had been, our provider in so many senses of the word. My mother had always worked, but my dad, he made sure, we don't know. And I give them so much credit now that I'm a parent of my own, right? Because you can only imagine at the time, and not really because as a kid you don't care. You just want stuff and you expect it to be done. And now that I'm a parent and I'm an adult and I'm managing my own finances and managing my own household, you just appreciate how much sacrifice is involved, how much planning has to be involved. And so you just call and say, Daddy, I need. and he would make it happen, right? And I remember some days he'd be like, "Boy, baby doll, this is my last $5." And I'd be like, "Okay, thank you," right? But now you understand what that means. But I remember my little brother was still in high school. My mom just had a few years left at work before they were going to ask her to retire because of her age, and I just gave it to God. I said, "God, you're gonna have to provide because you took our provider, right?" And so I'm putting this back on you. And Pastor Dave, God has never not kept that promise to provide for us. It's not always easy, Pastor Dave, but He always makes a way. He always makes a way. And so for that, I just remain grateful that I stayed committed. And I think for anybody watching this, you don't have to have had a traumatic situation. Thank you. You don't have to have been abused or raped or fought drugs or shot, right? Some people, that is their story, and God is able to bring them through that. But many of you will just be day-to-day Christians that God gets to bless with abundance and favor. And yet, even on that journey, you will deal with loss, right? Whether it's the loss of a dream or the loss of a child or the loss of a loved one. And these are the human circumstances of our life. And this is when our faith is tested.
Right.
And so how do we stand firm?
And all of us have that experience we have to go through.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've been blessed with. Today we know you as the host of the Bahamas at Sunrise, but you've done a lot of other very, very amazing things. Tell us about some of them.
God has been so good. So even all along this journey, God has been good. And I had a high school scholarship, right? And so I went to the great Bishop Michael Eldon School. Back then it was Freeport Anglican High. I got to be head girl, and I got to do national debate and win the national debate championships. And just really, I think my greatest gift has been that I get to work in my gifting, that I get to operate in the thing that God has given me most naturally. The ability to inspire, to motivate, to articulate has been a blessing on my life since I was a very little girl, straight up to now. And coming out of that, I talked to you about getting that scholarship through Miss Whitehead and the foundation at the time. And even as that time period was happening, I mentioned that I was the youth ambassador for the country. And so I just want to shout out Authoring Turnquest Hannah, who is the former director of youth when I was selected to that post, and an amazing team of people there at the Ministry of Youth who I still...
My good friend also.
Yeah, man. They're very good people. And I still try to give back to the Ministry of Youth as much as possible because they changed my life. And at that point, what they provided was a space for young people. We were working on the National Youth Policy at the time, and because I was in an active service, and this is important for me because I know so many people who want more than their current circumstance, and they don't necessarily know what to do to get out of it, right? And I ask, are you serving? Are you giving of your time anywhere, right? Because a lot of times the opportunity will come from service. That's what God calls us to live our lives in service in a community. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily do things free all the time, but you've got to be willing to have a pure heart. And so many of the blessings have come just from those things my mother taught me, right? Good manners take you around the world. She was a servant herself, and so she would make us at least once to twice a year pack up clothes and toys and take them to the Red Cross or the Salvation Army or the Children's Home and play with the children. And we weren't people with much, but she still made us give what we had, right? And so I've learned that heart of servant leadership from her, and it's opened those doors for me. And God blessed me with those opportunities. At the University of Miami, I got to meet Bill Clinton and to talk about, stuff here in the Bahamas that we wanted to get done. And coming out of that, even after my dad's death, when I had no job and I wasn't sure what I was going to do next because the plans that he and I had together were now gone, I was playing a random game of Taboo at a friend's house. Somebody saw me play. I can be a little aggressive when I play Pastor Dave, I gotta admit. But she saw me play. She thought I had great leadership skills, so let's go with that. And invited me to come and interview for a job at Atlantis, which is one of the first places that I worked. And I got to be a manager trainee there. At the end of that program, they weren't sure where they were going to put me. And I knew that what the options were, I didn't feel called to. And I remember being in prayer, Pastor Dave, like, God, I need you. I need the Spirit to guide me. And he sent it. Just the Spirit told me, go and talk to this one particular woman. And I went and I had a conversation with her. And this is after I had been rejected from a post I had applied for and told that, I'm not good enough for that post and please don't apply again, right? God sends me to talk to this woman, and I go and I speak with her. And Pastor Dave, a week or two later, she calls me back and they made me the marketing manager for food and beverage.
Wow.
And my office was right near the person who told me, please don't come back again, right? And so God just he sets the table in the presence, right? And so, again, a blessing there. Obviously, even with all of this, Pastor Dave, my greatest blessing has got to be my husband and my children, and that I get to enjoy them. Because there was even a point after I gave birth to my first daughter that we didn't think I would make it.
Wow.
Yeah, I blacked out. My heart rate was beating too fast and they couldn't bring it down. They weren't sure what was causing it. And that entire time that process was happening, my mom was just saying, Jesus, 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 right? No long prayer, just calling on the name of God. And I'm still here today, Pastor Dave.
Wow.
I'm still here today.
What an amazing story.
Mm-hmm.
I want to thank you so much for what you shared today. I mean, it was a tremendous experience for me to just hear your story. You know, it's just amazing.
Thank you.
You see people, but you don't know their story. And you know, something that you said that was really powerful. You said the importance of serving.
Yeah.
And you know, I remember Jesus said some words that were real simple. He said, "It's better to give than to receive."
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't understand that you actually end up receiving more by giving.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that he said that always, you know, caught my attention is he said, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve."
Yeah.
So if the greatest of all time could focus in on serving, then that's a cue for us that we need to serve.
Indeed. Indeed.
So thanks once again for sharing your story with us today. It's been a powerful experience for me, you know, and I'm sure those people who are watching, they've really been blessed. So once again, we want to thank Star for sharing with us today, and we trust that what she shared has been a blessing to you, an encouragement, a story of hope and faith, and inspiration to you, that we can all make it in life, we can all experience what God has for us. So thanks once again for watching our stories of hope and faith, and we'll see you next time. God bless.
Thanks for watching Our Stories of Hope and Faith. We trust that today's program has inspired and motivated you to succeed through your journey. Connect with us today to share your story of hope and faith, or to let us know how this show has impacted your life by sending us an email at ourstoriesofhopeandfaith@gmail.com.